I turned 33 thinking I was walking into a simple birthday dinner. Then my mother, Celeste, tapped her spoon against her glass. I braced for a backhanded compliment, but she didn't critique my hair. Instead, she laughed and announced to the entire table that she had adopted me specifically for the tax benefits. As the room went dead silent, I realized she wasn't telling a joke. She was balancing a ledger. The linen napkin in my lap was folded into a perfect triangle, a stiff white pyramid that I had been smoothing down with my thumb for the last 20 minutes. It was my 33rd birthday. We were seated at the hearth, the kind of restaurant in downtown Crestbrook that capitalized on exposed brick, dim Edison bulbs, and the promise of locally sourced everything. It was a safe choice, a neutral ground. I had learned early in life that neutral ground was the only place to meet my mother. My partner, Ethan, sat to my right, his knee pressing gently against mine under the table. It was a silent anchor. Across from us sat my stepfather, Grant, who was currently studying the wine list with the intensity of a man trying to decipher a bomb defusal manual. Next to him was my Aunt Marlene and her son, my cousin Leo, and at the head of the table, the empty chair. She was late. Of course she was late. Celeste did not merely arrive at events. She curated her entrances. "Relax, Vi," Ethan whispered, leaning in close so only I could hear. "She is probably just parking." I forced a smile, picking up my water glass. The ice clinked against the crystal. I knew she wasn't parking. She was likely just outside, checking her reflection in the rearview mirror, applying a fresh coat of that berry-colored lipstick she had worn since 1995, waiting until the exact moment when our collective anxiety peaked. 5 minutes later, the heavy oak door at the front of the restaurant swung open. The air in the room seemed to shift, sucking toward the entrance. Celeste swept in, bringing a gust of cold Pennsylvania autumn air and the scent of expensive gardenias with her. She was wearing a camel hair coat that looked softer than butter, cinched tight at the waist, and her blonde bob was immobile, perfect, a golden helmet of authority. She spotted us, and her face lit up with a performance of delight so convincing that for a second, even I wanted to believe it. "There is my birthday girl," she announced, her voice carrying just enough to make the heads at the neighboring tables turn. She navigated through the crowded dining room, touching the shoulder of a stranger as she squeezed past, offering a dazzling apology that left the man looking like he had just been blessed. When she reached our table, she didn't sit. She came straight to me, wrapping her arms around my shoulders from behind, pressing her cold cheek against mine. "I am so sorry, darling," she murmured into my ear. The traffic on the ridge was a nightmare. You know how those construction crews are. They have absolutely no respect for people with schedules. "It is fine. Mom," I said, reaching up to pat her arm. I knew for a fact there was no construction on the ridge this late in the evening. "I am just glad you made it." She released me and took her seat at the head of the table, immediately commanding the space. She signaled the waiter with a flick of her wrist that was both elegant and imperious. Within seconds, she had ordered a bottle of wine that cost more than my weekly grocery budget and had charmed the young man into bringing an extra basket of focaccia. For the first hour, it went well, better than well. Actually, Celeste was in her golden mode. She asked Ethan about his architecture firm, listening with intent eyes. She complimented Aunt Marlene on her scarf. She told a funny, self-deprecating story about her garden club that had the whole table laughing. I felt the knot in my stomach begin to loosen. Maybe I had been wrong to dread this. Maybe 33 was the year we finally figured out how to be two adult women sharing a meal without blood being drawn. Then the main courses were cleared, and the waiter poured the last of the red wine. Celeste tapped her fork against her glass. The sound was sharp, piercing through the low hum of the restaurant. "I want to say a few words," she said. Standing up, she held her glass by the stem, the red liquid swirling dangerously close to the rim. Grant looked up from his plate, his eyes widening slightly. He knew the danger signs better than anyone. He reached out a hand as if to touch her elbow, but she stepped away, beaming down at me. "To Violet," she began, I looked down at my hands. I hated this part. The public adoration that usually masked private criticism. 33 years ago. Grant and I were looking at our finances. She said, her voice light, conversational. It was a different time. We were building the house. The business was just starting to take off, and the accountants were absolutely hounding us about our tax brackets. I frowned slightly. This was not the usual birthday speech. Usually, she talked about how tiny I was when I arrived, or how I had cried for 6 months straight. We were sitting in that drafty office with our tax guy, and he looked at us and said we really needed a few more deductions if we wanted to keep the foundation solvent. She continued, a small, tinkling laugh escaping her lips, and I remember looking at Grant and saying, well, we have the space, and God knows we need the write-off. So, we went out and got ourselves a daughter. She paused for effect, grinning as if she had just delivered the punchline to a delightful anecdote. So, here is to Violet, she said, raising her glass higher. The best little tax shelter a mother could ask for. Happy birthday. Darling, even if it was for the benefits. You turned out all right, she laughed again, a bright, social sound, and took a sip of her wine. The silence that followed was absolute. It wasn't a stunned silence. It was a horrified one. The air had been sucked out of our corner of the restaurant. Ethan had frozen, his fork halfway to his mouth. Aunt Marlene was staring at her sister with her mouth slightly open. Grant was studying the tablecloth, as if looking for a trapdoor to swallow him whole. I felt the heat rise up my neck, a violent flush that I knew was turning my skin blotchy and red. It was a familiar sensation, the burning shame of being reduced, of being reminded that my presence in this family was a transaction. But 33 years of practice had given me armor. I knew that if I cried, she would call me sensitive. If I got angry, she would call me ungrateful. If I walked out, I would be the drama queen who ruined the party. So, I did the only thing I knew how to do. I swallowed the bile in my throat and forced the corners of my mouth up. Well, I said, my voice steady, though it sounded like it was coming from underwater. I am glad I could help the bottom line. Mom, at least I paid for myself. I picked up my glass and took a drink. Celeste beamed, oblivious or perhaps perfectly aware of the devastation she had caused. Exactly. You have always been practical. Violet, that is what I love about you. I turned immediately to Cousin Leo. Leo, you were saying you started a new rotation at the hospital. How is that going? The relief at the table was palpable. I had given them permission to breathe again. Leo jumped on the topic like a lifeline, launching into a story about the emergency room, and the conversation lurched forward, wounded but moving. I sat there, nodding at the right moments, smiling when required, while inside, something foundational was beginning to crack. It wasn't just the cruelty of the joke, it was the specificity of it. Tax benefits. Who says that? Who even thinks that 40 minutes later, the bill was paid? I had insisted on splitting it with Grant. Despite Celeste's performative protests, we were standing near the coat check, the group fracturing as people said their goodbyes. Celeste was holding court near the door, buttoning that camel hair coat, laughing with the hostess. I felt a nudge at my elbow. It was Leo. He looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. He glanced toward Celeste to make sure she wasn't looking, then pressed a crumpled white envelope into my hand. She dropped this when she pulled her gloves out of her purse. He muttered, his voice low. I picked it up to give it back to her, but then I saw what was written on the paper inside. I don't think she meant to bring it. He looked at me, his eyes full of a pity that made my skin crawl. Just take it. Vi. Happy birthday. He turned and walked away before I could ask him what he meant. I looked down at the envelope. It was plain, white, and unsealed. I slid my thumb under the flap and pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was a photocopy, grainy and slightly crooked. As if it had been done in a hurry, it looked like a receipt or a ledger entry. In the top corner was a case number, CW-89-402. Below that, a date from 33 years ago, and then, Typed in a font that belonged to a typewriter, not a computer, were the words, "Received on behalf of North Pine Family Outreach." I stared at the name, North Pine Family Outreach. I had lived in Crestbrook my entire life. I knew every charity, every foundation, every school board committee because my mother sat on half of them. I had never heard of this organization. I looked up. Celeste was walking out the door, Grant trailing behind her like a weary ghost. I shoved the paper into my purse and followed them. The parking lot was dark, the streetlights casting long orange pools of light on the asphalt. The air was biting, smelling of dead leaves and exhaust. Celeste was standing by her silver sedan, waiting for Grant to unlock the passenger door. "Mom," I called out. She turned, her smile tightening just a fraction when she saw it was me. "Violet." It was a lovely dinner. The risotto was a little undercooked, but the company was charming. "What was that toast?" I asked. I didn't want to shout, but my voice was shaking. She rolled her eyes, opening her car door. "Oh, please, don't start. It was a joke. I was trying to lighten the mood. Everyone was so stiff. You told a table full of people you adopted me for a tax write-off," I said, walking closer, and everyone laughed. "Except you," she countered, tossing her purse onto the seat. "You have always been so dramatic, Violet, so heavy. You take everything as a personal attack. It is exhausting." I reached into my bag and my fingers brushed the crumpled paper. But I stopped myself. Not yet. I didn't know what it was yet. It didn't feel like a joke. I said, "It felt like you were trying to humiliate me." She slammed the car door shut, not getting in, and turned to face me fully. Her expression shifted. The warmth vanished, replaced by a cold, sharp appraisal. "Listen to me," she said, her voice dropping to a hiss. "You are up for that promotion next week, aren't you? The regional manager position?" I blinked, taken aback by the pivot. "Yes. What does that have to do with—" "It has everything to do with it." She cut in. "People in this town talk. Violet, they look at families like ours, and they look for cracks. If you go around acting like a wounded victim, digging up messy old things, looking unstable, well, corporations don't like unstable managers." I stared at her. Was she threatening me? It sounded like she was warning me, but the threat was wrapped in the guise of advice. "What messy old things?" I asked quietly. She sighed, a sound of supreme impatience. "Just go home, Violet. Go home to your nice boyfriend and your nice life and stop looking for problems where there aren't any. I gave you a life. Don't make me regret the investment." She opened the door again and slid into the seat. Grant gave me a helpless look over the roof of the car, then got in the driver's side. I watched them pull away, the red taillights of the sedan disappearing around the corner. I stood there in the cold for a long time, shivering not from the temperature, but from the sudden, hollow realization that my mother didn't just dislike me, she was managing me. The drive home was quiet. Ethan drove, his hand resting on my thigh, giving it a squeeze every few miles. He knew when I needed space. When we got back to our townhouse, I kicked off my heels and went straight to the kitchen to make tea. My hands were trembling as I filled the kettle. Ethan leaned against the counter, watching me. "That was a lot," he said carefully. I shrugged, reaching for the mugs. "It is just Celeste being Celeste. She has had a few stressful weeks with the garden gala. She drinks a little too much wine and her filter falls off. It's fine." "Violet," he said. I turned to look at him. His face was open, concerned, and it made my chest ache. "She told people she bought you for a tax break," he said. "That isn't just a filter falling off. That is cruel." I forced a laugh, waving my hand dismissively. "She likes to shock people. It is her way of controlling the room. If she makes herself the villain, she controls the narrative. I am used to it." "You shouldn't be," he said softly. "You shouldn't be used to that." I looked away, focusing on the blue flame of the gas stove. I realized then that I was doing exactly what I always did. I was shrinking. I was minimizing the damage so that it would fit into the box I had built for my life. If I admitted how much it hurt, if I admitted that I was afraid she was telling the truth, the box would explode. "I am tired. Ethan," I said, "I think I just want to go to bed." He looked at me for a moment longer, disappointed but resigned. "Okay, I will be up in a bit." I took my tea upstairs, but I didn't drink it. I sat on the edge of the bed and pulled the crumpled photocopy out of my purse. I smoothed it out on the duvet. CW 89402, North Pine Family Outreach. I pulled my laptop onto my lap and opened a browser window. I typed the name into the search bar. The results were sparse. No official website, no Wikipedia page. I scrolled down. I found a cached listing from a charity navigator site that hadn't been updated in 12 years. It listed North Pine Family Outreach as a religious and charitable organization dedicated to family placement services. The status was listed as inactive/dissolved. I clicked another link. It was a PDF of a scanned newsletter from a church in a neighboring county, dated 15 years ago. It mentioned a donation drive for North Pine, and then, on the third page of search results, I found a digital archive of a dissolved business registry. It listed the registered agent for the nonprofit. The address was a P.O. box in downtown Crestbrook that I knew was now a parking garage. But below the address, there was a list of initial board members: Reverend Thomas Miller, Mrs. Lila Hart, Mr. G. Sterling. I froze. G. Sterling. My stepfather's name was Grant Sterling, before he married my mother. He had used that email handle for everything, gsterling88. I remembered it because I used to email him my Christmas lists when I was 10. I closed the laptop slowly. Grant wasn't just my stepfather. He was on the board of the agency that handled my adoption. The agency my mother claimed was a tax shelter. I didn't sleep that night. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening to Ethan's steady breathing beside me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Celeste smile as she raised that glass. The best little tax shelter. By morning, the shame had curdled into something else, something colder and harder. I called in sick to work. It was the first time in 5 years I had done so without a fever. I dressed in business casual slacks and a blazer, as if I were going to a meeting. In a way, I was. The Crestbrook County Office of Vital Records was located in the basement of the municipal building, a place that smelled of floor wax and stale coffee. The fluorescent lights buzzed with a headache-inducing frequency. I walked up to the counter. The clerk was a woman in her 60s, with reading glasses on a chain and a cardigan that looked like it had been knitted from steel wool. "Can I help you?" she asked without looking up from her paperwork. "I am looking for my adoption records." I said, "My name is Violet Reed. I was born in 1990. She looked up then, her eyes scanning my face. She sighed, pushing her glasses up her nose. "Are you the adoptee?" "Yes." She typed something into her computer, the keys clacking loudly in the quiet room. "Name of adoptive parents: Celeste and Grant Sterling." "Well, Celeste Reed at the time. She remarried." The clerk typed some more. She squinted at the screen, then frowned. "I see the file here," she said, "but I can't open it for you." "Why not?" I asked. "I am over 18. In Pennsylvania." I thought I had the right to request a non-certified copy of the original birth certificate. "Usually." "Yes," she said, "but this file is sealed by court order, not the standard seal." "This is a judicial seal. What does that mean?" "It means a judge ordered it closed to everyone, including the adoptee, unless there is a court order to open it for good cause." My heart hammered against my ribs. "Why would it be sealed like that?" She shrugged. "I don't know the details. I can't see the documents. But," she hesitated, looking around the empty office to make sure we were alone. "What I pressed," she lowered her voice. "The case number on this index, CW-89-402. It is odd. Odd how the prefix, CW, usually. That stands for child welfare. But in this county, in the 90s, private adoptions usually started with PV, and the number sequence. It is older than most files from 1990. It looks like a case number from a few years prior that was reused or refiled." She wrote something on a sticky note and slid it across the counter. "Here is the form to petition the court for access. You will need a lawyer. It is not an easy process." I looked at the piece of yellow paper. "Thank you," I said. I walked out of the municipal building into the bright, blinding sunlight. The world looked the same as it had yesterday, the coffee shop on the corner, the people rushing to work, but I felt like I was standing on a different planet. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from my manager. "David, Vi, can you come in for a quick sync when you're back?" Had an odd call from a community contact regarding some reputation concerns surrounding the team. "Want to get ahead of it?" I stared at the screen. Reputation concerns. Celeste. She hadn't waited. She knew I had the envelope. She knew I had questions. And she had launched a preemptive strike. She was poisoning the well at my job, planting seeds of doubt about my stability so that if I did speak out, I would look like a disgruntled, spiraling daughter. It landed like a threat. It was a threat. I stood on the sidewalk, the noise of the city washing over me. I could go home. I could delete the text, throw away the sticky note, and pretend the toast was just a bad joke. I could apologize to Celeste for being dramatic and secure my promotion. I could keep the peace, but I remembered the way she laughed. I remembered the feeling of the room going silent. I remembered the words, "North Pine Family Outreach" on a ledger that treated me like an acquisition. I gripped the sticky note in my hand until the paper crinkled. She wanted me to be a tax write-off. She wanted me to be a prop in her perfect life. She thought she could rewrite my history and I would just smile and say thank you. I walked toward my car. I wasn't going to beg for dignity anymore. If my mother wanted to turn my origin into a punchline, then I was going to learn the real story, even if I had to burn the whole family down to read it. The office of Elias Vance, Family Law, was located 3 streets over from the courthouse, sandwiched between a dry cleaner and a bakery that always burned its croissants. The waiting room smelled of stale coffee and anxiety. I sat on a tufted leather sofa that had seen better decades. My hands clasped so tightly in my lap that my knuckles had turned white. I expected to feel like an imposter. I expected to feel like a child playing dress-up in a grown-up world, asking questions I had no right to ask. But when the heavy oak door opened and Elias Vance beckoned me in, I didn't feel small. I felt precise. It was a strange sensation, a cold clarity that had settled over me since the morning at the records office. It felt like I had been rehearsing for this meeting for 33 years without realizing it. Elias was a man of indeterminable age, with skin like crumpled parchment and eyes that were sharp and unblinking. He sat behind a desk piled high with manila folders, listening as I recounted the dinner, the toast, and the case number the clerk had flagged. He didn't interrupt. He just tapped a yellow pencil against his notepad, a rhythmic tick-tick that matched the clock on the wall. "So," he said finally, his voice gravelly, "you want to unseal the file?" "Yes," I said. "The clerk said I need a court order. She said I need good cause." "Good cause is a slippery term," Elias said, leaning back. "In Pennsylvania, for a file this old, sealed by a judicial order, we need to prove that knowing the information outweighs the privacy rights of the birth parents. Usually, that means medical necessity, a genetic condition, a life or death diagnosis. I don't have a diagnosis." I said, "I have a lie. My mother told me my adoption was a tax scheme. I need to know if that is true." Elias stopped tapping the pencil. He looked down at the notes he had taken, specifically at the case number I had given him. CW89402. "The clerk was right to flag this," he murmured, almost to himself. "What does it mean?" I asked, leaning forward. He took off his reading glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. Standard agency adoptions in this county followed a specific alphanumeric sequence. He explained they were bureaucratic, orderly, but in the late 80s and early 90s, there was a subset of cases that were handled differently. We called them private placements. Private placements, I repeated. It means the adoption wasn't arranged through the state foster system or the primary agencies. He said, it usually involved an intermediary, a lawyer, a doctor, sometimes a religious figure, someone who connected a birth mother directly to a wealthy family. The paperwork was often expedited, and the files were often sealed with a higher level of security to protect the privacy of the people who facilitated the transaction. Intermediary. The word hit me in the stomach like a physical blow. It sounded clinical, detached. It sounded like a broker. So you are saying I was bought? I said, my voice flat. I am saying the format of your case number suggests money changed hands in a way that required extra layers of silence. Elias corrected gently. And if there was a nonprofit involved, like this North Pine Family Outreach you mentioned, it complicates things. Nonprofits in that era were sometimes used to launder fees as charitable donations. It made the payment tax-deductible for the adoptive parents and tax-exempt for the facilitator. I felt the blood drain from my face. Tax-deductible. Celeste hadn't been making a joke. She had been stating a fact. We file the petition, Elias said, his voice firming up. We argue that the existence of this nonprofit and the irregular case number suggest fraud or coercion. We argue that you have a right to know the legitimacy of your own identity. It will be a fight. Violet. If this file was buried this deep, someone wanted it to stay there. I am ready, I said, and I meant it. I left his office with a retainer agreement signed and a task list. The first item on the list was to find out everything I could about North Pine Family Outreach. I drove straight to the address I had found in the online archive. The one linked to the old P.O. box. It wasn't a post office. It was a narrow, dusty storefront called the Mail Room, squeezed into a strip mall on the edge of town that had clearly seen better days. The windows were plastered with faded advertisements for shipping services and passport photos. The bell above the door chimed as I walked in. The air inside smelled of packing tape and cardboard. An older man with a white mustache and a Philadelphia Phillies cap was behind the counter, weighing a package for a teenager. I waited until the customer left, then approached the counter. "Help you?" the man asked. "I hope so," I said, pulling up the screenshot on my phone. "I know this is a long shot, but did you own this place in 1990? He laughed. A dry, wheezing sound. "I have owned this place since 1982. Why I am looking for information about a P.O. box that used to be rented here." I said, "Box 404. The renter was an organization called North Pine Family Outreach." The man's smile faded. He squinted at me, his eyes narrowing under the brim of his cap. "North Pine," he said slowly. "I haven't heard that name in 20 years. But you remember it, hard to forget." He grunted. Most of my customers were people mailing birthday cards or small businesses shipping parts. That box? That was different. They got a lot of mail, official-looking stuff, heavy envelopes, and they never let it pile up. Someone came every day at 10 in the morning to clear it out. "Do you remember who picked it up?" I asked, my heart starting to pound. He scratched his chin. "It was a long time ago. But yeah, I remember. It was a woman. Not the friendly type. She never said hello, never bought a stamp. She just unlocked the box, shoved everything into a leather tote bag, and left. She wore big sunglasses, always looked like she was afraid someone was following her. Did she have a name?" "The box was registered to the organization," he said, "but I think I saw her sign for a certified letter once. She had a distinctive signature, sharp, jagged." He paused, looking at me closely. "Why are you asking? I am trying to find out where I came from." I said simply. He softened then. He leaned over the counter, his voice lowering. "Look, miss, I don't have the records anymore. We purged that stuff after 7 years. But I remember one thing. That woman. She didn't drive a regular car. She drove a big, black luxury sedan. A Lincoln, maybe. And it had a vanity plate. Do you remember what it said?" I whispered. He shook his head. "Not the whole thing. But I remember the end of it. It ended in GFT, like gift, but without the I." I thanked him and walked out to my car, my mind racing. GFT, gift, or maybe grant number. That didn't fit. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Aunt Marlene. "Vi, are you free? I'm at the bean grinder. I feel terrible about dinner. Please let me buy you a coffee." I stared at the screen. Marlene was Celeste's younger sister. The nervous, fluttering moth to Celeste's flame. She usually avoided conflict at all costs. For her to reach out meant something was wrong. I met her 20 minutes later. She was sitting in a corner booth, shredding a paper napkin into tiny white confetti. When she saw me, she jumped up and hugged me, smelling of lavender laundry detergent and guilt. "I am so sorry." "Violet," she said, pulling me down into the seat opposite her. "I should have said something. I should have told Celeste to shut her mouth. It was awful. It is okay." "Aunt Marlene," I said, signaling the waitress. "I am used to it. You shouldn't have to be," she said, her eyes watering. She gets like this. When she feels insecure, she lashes out, insecure about what I asked. She has the perfect house, the perfect reputation, the perfect life." Marlene looked down at her coffee cup. "She is terrified." "Vi, she has been terrified since the day she brought you home." The waitress set a black coffee down in front of me. I waited until she walked away before I spoke. Terrified of what Marlene glanced around the coffee shop, checking the nearby tables, paper trails. She whispered, that is what she always called them. She was obsessed with making sure there were no paper trails when you were little. She wouldn't even keep your medical records in the file cabinet in the study. She kept everything locked away. She fired a babysitter once because the girl wrote down your feeding schedule in a notebook Celeste hadn't authorized. I frowned. "That sounds like paranoia." "It was," Marlene agreed. "But it was specific. She used to tell me, if it is not written down, it never happened. She wanted everyone to believe you were hers, completely. That there was no before." I took a sip of coffee, the bitter liquid grounding me. "Marlene," I said carefully, "do you know a woman named Lila Hart?" Marlene's head snapped up. Her face went slack with shock. "Where did you hear that name?" she gasped. "I found it." I lied. "In some old papers." Marlene's hand shook so hard coffee sloshed over the rim of her mug. "Don't, Violet," she pleaded, her voice trembling. "Don't say that name to Celeste. Please." "Why? Who is she?" Marlene stood up abruptly, grabbing her purse. I can't do this. Celeste will kill me if she knows I talked to you. She knows things. Violet. She can ruin people." "Marlene." I reached out to grab her hand, but she pulled away. "Just leave it alone," Marlene hissed, tears spilling onto her cheeks. "Some secrets are safer when they are buried." "You were a happy child. Just hold on to that." She rushed out of the coffee shop, leaving me with a spilled coffee and a name that seemed to carry a voltage I didn't understand. Lila Hart. I went home early. Ethan was still at work. The house was quiet, but it felt crowded with ghosts. I went into the master bedroom and opened my closet. When I had moved into this condo 5 years ago, Celeste had sent over a dozen boxes of Violet's junk from her attic. I had unpacked most of it yearbooks, old sweaters, trophies for participation in soccer. But there were a few boxes I had shoved to the back of the deep walk-in closet and ignored. I started pulling them out. College textbooks, winter coats, miscellaneous. I cut the tape on the box marked miscellaneous with a pair of scissors. Inside were old stuffed animals and a stack of coloring books. I dug deeper. At the bottom, wrapped in a faded yellow baby blanket, was a metal box. It was a gray lockbox, the kind you buy at an office supply store. It was heavy. I lifted it out and set it on the floor. It was locked. I remembered Marlene's words. She wouldn't even keep your medical records in the file cabinet. I went to the garage and got a screwdriver and a hammer. I didn't care about preserving the box. I wedged the screwdriver into the latch and hammered the end of it until the metal groaned and popped open. The lid swung back. Inside, the air smelled musty, like old libraries. There was a stack of papers. I lifted them out one by one. My vaccination record from 1991. A certificate of baptism from a church in a town 3 hours away that I had never visited. A receipt for a donation of $5,000 to the Crestbrook Civic Fund, dated 2 days before my birthday. And then, at the very bottom, a small piece of cream-colored stationery. The paper was heavy, expensive. I unfolded it. There was no letterhead. Just a handwritten note in blue ink. The handwriting was elegant, looping, but hurried. To my little V. Forgive me. L. Heart. I stared at the paper. Little V. My mother Celeste had never called me V. She hated nicknames. She said they were common. I sat on the floor of my closet, holding the note, and I felt a grief I couldn't name wash over me. This woman, this L. Heart, had asked for forgiveness. For what? For giving me up, or for something else? I stood up. I didn't think. I didn't plan. I grabbed the note, grabbed my car keys, and drove to my parents' house. Celeste and Grant lived in a sprawling colonial on the hill, the kind of house that looked like it belonged on a postcard for the American dream. I parked in the circular driveway and let myself in with my key. Mother, I called out. I found her in the sunroom, arranging flowers in a crystal vase. She was wearing a silk blouse and white trousers, looking serene and untouchable. Violet, she said, not looking up from the hydrangeas. To what do I owe the pleasure? Did you come to apologize for your mood yesterday? I walked up to the table and slammed the piece of cream-colored stationery down next to the vase. Who is L? Heart, I demanded. Celeste froze. Her hand hovered over a stem of baby's breath. For a second, just a second, I saw a flicker of genuine fear in her eyes. It was gone so fast I almost missed it, replaced instantly by a mask of cold fury. She picked up the note. She read it, her face impassive, then crumpled it in her hand. Where did you get this? She asked, her voice dangerously quiet. I found the lockbox, I said, the one you hid in my things. Who is she? Mom. Is she my birth mother? Celeste laughed, a harsh, barking sound. Your birth mother. Oh, Violet, you have such a romantic imagination. You think some tragic heroine left you in a basket on my doorstep? Then who is she? Why is she asking for forgiveness? She was a disturbed woman. Celeste snapped, tossing the crumpled paper into the trash bin beneath the table. A volunteer who got too attached. We had to file a restraining order. She was mentally unstable. Violet, just like you are acting right now, you are lying, I said. My voice was steady. I know about the private placement. I know about North Pine Family Outreach. I know you paid for me. Celeste's eyes narrowed. She wiped her hands on a towel and walked around the table to stand in front of me. You know nothing, she spat. You are ungrateful. Do you have any idea what we went through to get you, the risks we took? And this is how you repay us, by digging through my trash and accusing me of crimes. You are trying to rewrite history to make yourself interesting. Violet, but the truth is boring. You were unwanted. We wanted you. End of story. She walked over to her desk in the corner of the room. She opened a drawer and pulled out a checkbook. She scribbled something furiously, ripped the check out, and thrust it at me. You want to know about money, fine. Here, I looked at the check. It was made out to Violet Reed. The amount was $25,000, and in the top left corner, instead of Celeste Sterling, the name printed on the check was North Pine Family Outreach. Happy birthday, Celeste said, her voice dripping with venom. Take the money, go on a trip, buy a new car, and stop asking questions you don't want the answers to. I stared at the check. The account was still active. North Pine Family Outreach wasn't dead. It was just hers, or she had access to it. This isn't a gift, I said, looking up at her. This is hush money. Call it what you want, she said, turning her back to me. Just take it and leave. I have a gala to plan. I let the check flutter to the floor. I don't want your money, I said. I walked out. I heard her calling my name as I reached the front door. But I didn't look back. When I got home, Ethan was in the living room, his laptop open on his knees. He looked up, his face pale. Vi, he said, we need to talk. I dropped my purse on the floor and sat next to him. I felt hollowed out. What is it? I asked. I did something, he admitted. Last night, after you went to sleep, I was worried about you. You seemed so obsessed with that agency name. So I posted on a forum, a genealogy board for closed adoptions. My stomach dropped. You did what I just asked if anyone had heard of North Pine Family Outreach in Crestbrook. He said quickly, "I didn't use your name. I just asked for general info." "Ethan," I said, standing up. "That is my story. You had no right." "I was trying to help," he said, standing up to face me. "You are drowning in this." "Violet, I wanted to throw you a rope." "Did anyone answer?" I asked, dread coiling in my gut. "Yes," he said. "One person. They sent a private message. They said, 'Tell her to stop looking before she finds the ledger,' and then they deleted their account." The ledger. I felt a chill run down my spine. I felt violated that he had shared this with strangers, but also validated. Someone else knew. Someone else was watching. "I can't believe you did that," I said, my voice shaking. "I am scared for you." "Vi," he said, reaching for me. "You are changing. You are distant. You are angry all the time." "I am not angry," I said, pulling away. "I am waking up." The tension in the room was thick enough to choke on. We went to bed in silence, a wide gulf of mattress between us. 2 days later, the letter from the court arrived. I opened it at the kitchen counter, my hands trembling. "RE petition to unseal adoption file. CW-89-402. Dear Ms. Reed, your petition has been received and reviewed. A preliminary hearing has been scheduled for next month. However, please be advised that a motion to intervene has been filed by a party of interest." I frowned. A party of interest. Celeste. I read the next line. "The contesting party is represented by Miller Associates, certified public accountants, Graybridge, Pennsylvania." I lowered the letter. It wasn't Celeste. It wasn't Grant. It wasn't even a family member. My adoption was being contested by an accounting firm. I looked out the window at the suburban street, at the manicured lawns, and the children riding bicycles. It all looked so normal. But beneath the surface, there were wires tripwired everywhere. Celeste wasn't just a controlling mother. She was a cog in a machine that involved lawyers, accountants, fake nonprofits, and sealed records. And by pulling this thread, I hadn't just annoyed my mother, I had triggered a corporate defense mechanism. I picked up my phone and dialed Elias Vance. "We have a problem," I said when he answered. "No, Violet," he said, and I could hear the grim smile in his voice. "We don't have a problem. We have a target." I hung up. I looked at the check Celeste had given me. The image of it burned into my mind. North Pine Family Outreach. They weren't just hiding my birth parents. They were hiding the money, and I was going to find it. Graybridge was only 20 miles east of Crestbrook, but it felt like a different tax bracket entirely. It was a city of glass facades, manicured corporate parks, and silent electric vehicles gliding over freshly paved asphalt. It was the kind of place where money didn't just talk. It whispered commands that everyone obeyed. I sat in my car in the visitor lot of the Centurion building, looking up at the 4th floor. That was where Miller and Associates, certified public accountants, held court. They were the entity trying to block me from seeing my own birth certificate. I had spent the morning digging. Miller and Associates wasn't a Main Street tax preparer. They were a boutique firm specializing in wealth preservation and philanthropic compliance. That was the polite way of saying they helped rich people keep their money away from the government. I picked up my phone and dialed the main number listed on their website. "Miller and Associates." A smooth female voice answered. "How may I direct your call?" I took a breath. "I am calling regarding a legal petition. Case number CW-89402. I would like to speak to the partner in charge of the intervention." There was a pause. The silence stretched for 5 seconds. Then 10. "One moment, please." The line clicked. Then, a series of electronic beeps. "You are being transferred to the client risk department." A robotic voice announced, "Please leave a message. Client risk." I hung up without leaving a message. My hands were cold on the steering wheel. Adoption wasn't a risk. Families weren't risks. Unless you were an accounting firm and the product you had sold 30 years ago was about to become a liability, it felt chillingly corporate. I wasn't a person to them. I was a loose end in a ledger that was supposed to have been closed decades ago. I needed a human. I had found a name on an archived staff page from 2005, Arthur Penhaligon. He had been a junior auditor at Miller & Associates during the years my adoption took place, according to LinkedIn. He was now retired and living in a modest suburb halfway between Graybridge and Crestbrook. He had agreed to meet me at a diner off the highway. Sounding hesitant but curious, Arthur was a man who looked like he had spent his life shrinking to fit into cubicles. He wore a beige windbreaker and wire-rimmed glasses, and he was nursing a cup of black coffee when I slid into the booth opposite him. "Violet Reed?" he asked, eyeing me nervously. "Yes, thank you for meeting me." "Arthur." He looked around the diner. It was empty save for a trucker eating pie at the counter. "I can't talk about specific client files," he said immediately. "I signed non-disclosure agreements that last until the sun burns out." "I am not asking for a file," I said, keeping my voice low. "I am asking about a practice, a pattern. Did Miller & Associates handle compliance for a nonprofit called North Pine Family Outreach?" Arthur flinched. The name clearly hit a nerve. He took a long sip of coffee, his hand trembling slightly. "North Pine," he muttered. "That was the Sterling account. And a few others. The Benevolent Circle families." "The Benevolent Circle," I asked. "What is that?" He sighed, putting the cup down. "Look, in the late 80s, there was a lot of creative accounting going on. The firm had a strategy for high-net-worth individuals who needed tax relief. They would set up small, private foundations or partner with existing nonprofits. The idea was to channel money into these organizations as charitable donations. And what did the organizations do with the money, I asked. Arthur looked at me, his eyes sad behind the thick lenses. "They provided services," he said carefully. "Sometimes those services were community outreach. Sometimes they were more personal, private placements, adoption support. I felt the blood roaring in my ears. So the donation paid for the baby," I said. He held up a hand. "No one ever wrote purchase of child on a check. That would be illegal. It was all coded. Placement support donation, dependency credits, operational grants. The money went to the nonprofit. The nonprofit paid the medical bills and the intermediaries, and the family got a healthy tax deduction for their generosity. It was a loop, a closed system. And my mother, Celeste Sterling," I asked, "was she part of this loop?" Arthur nodded slowly. "I remember her name. She was very specific about the paperwork. She wanted to make sure every penny was documented as a charitable gift. She used to call the partner, Mr. Miller, and scream if the acknowledgement letters were late. She needed them for her return." He leaned in closer. "It wasn't just about the tax break, Miss Reed. It was about the control. If you buy something, you own it. If you adopt through the state stays involved. If you adopt through a private channel you fund yourself, the file disappears." My stomach turned over. "If you buy something, you own it." "Why are they fighting me now?" I asked. "Why intervene in my petition because the firm is still liable?" Arthur whispered, "If it comes out that they facilitated the sale of infants disguised as charity, they lose their license, they go to prison, and the families lose their reputations." He checked his watch and stood up abruptly. "I have said too much. Good luck. Miss Reed, watch your back. These people play hardball." He left $5 on the table and walked out, leaving me with the confirmation that I was, legally and financially, a receipt. 2 days later, I drove to the Crestbrook Community Center. It was the annual fall luncheon for the Ladies' Civic League. Celeste was the guest of honor. She was receiving the Pillar of the Community Award for her 30 years of service to local families. The irony tasted like aluminum in my mouth. I didn't have a ticket, but I didn't need one. I slipped in through the catering entrance, flashing a confident smile at a waiter carrying a tray of salmon. I stood in the back of the ballroom, hidden by the shadows of the velvet curtains. The room was bathed in golden light. Round tables were draped in heavy white linens, centered with elaborate floral arrangements that probably cost more than my first car. The air smelled of expensive perfume and roast chicken. And there she was, Celeste sat at the center of the head table, elevated on a stage. She was wearing a suit of pale blue silk, her hair a perfect halo of gold. She looked radiant, benevolent. The woman at the podium, the mayor's wife, was speaking. Celeste Sterling is a woman who understands the true meaning of family. The woman gushed into the microphone. She opened her home and her heart when she didn't have to. She has given tirelessly to organizations that support the most vulnerable among us. Applause rippled through the room. Polite and enthusiastic, Celeste lowered her head modestly, dabbing at her dry eyes with a handkerchief. I watched her, and for the first time, I didn't just see my mother. I saw the architect. She didn't just want control. I realized that was too simple. She wanted a legacy. She wanted to be the saint who rescued the poor orphan. The tax benefits were the financial incentive, but the public adoration, that was the emotional currency. She had built a monument to her own goodness, and I was the cornerstone. If I pulled myself out, the whole thing would collapse. I felt a tap on my shoulder. I jumped, turning around. Standing behind me was a woman I vaguely recognized. She was in her late 50s, with salt and pepper hair cut in a sharp bob and intelligent, weary eyes. She wore a simple black dress that looked severe amidst the sea of pastels in the room. Dara Quinn. My mind supplied. She was a friend of Celeste's from the country club years ago, but they had drifted apart. I hadn't seen her in a decade. I wondered when you would find out. Dara said quietly. I stared at her. Excuse me? She gestured with her head toward the exit. Not here. Meet me in the parking lot. 5 minutes. She slipped away before I could answer. I waited 5 minutes, watching Celeste accept her glass trophy, watching her bask in the applause. Then I turned and walked out. The parking lot was quiet, the autumn sun glaring off the rows of luxury SUVs. Dara was leaning against a silver Volvo, smoking a cigarette with quick, nervous puffs. You are Violet, she said as I approached. You look just like her. Like Celeste, I asked. No, she said, dropping the cigarette and crushing it under her heel. Like the other one. My heart hammered. The other one. Dara crossed her arms. I saw you sneaking in. I heard about the scene at the birthday dinner. Marlene told me. Marlene is a wreck. By the way, she is terrified Celeste is going to cut her off. What do you know? Dara, I asked. Dara sighed, looking toward the community center where the applause was still faintly audible. I was part of it, she said. The circle, the benevolent circle. It wasn't an official club. It was just a group of us. Women who wanted things, babies, reputation, influence. She looked at me directly. Celeste didn't just stumble into North Pine Family Outreach. She helped organize it. We all did. We needed a way to move money around that looked clean. We called it the Benevolent Circle because we told ourselves we were doing good. We were saving children from poverty. But you were buying us. I said. We were expediting the process, Dara corrected, though her voice lacked conviction. We paid fees, high fees, to a woman who could get things done. Lila Hart. I asked. Dara flinched, just like Arthur had. So you have a name, she said. Yes, Lila. She was the fixer. She ran the nonprofit. She found the birth mothers, handled the medical care, and delivered the babies. She was efficient and expensive. Why did she vanish, I asked. Why is the file sealed so tight? Because it wasn't just adoption, Dara said. It was tax fraud on a massive scale. We were writing off the payments as charitable donations. And Lila was getting greedy. She started blackmailing people, threatening to expose the real nature of the transactions if the donations didn't keep coming. I felt sick. My entire existence was a crime scene. And Celeste, I asked, did she pay Lila off? Celeste was the smartest of us, Dara said with a grim smile. She didn't just pay Lila, she neutralized her. I don't know how, but one day, Lila was gone. The nonprofit dissolved, and Celeste had you, and a perfect paper trail that said she was a saint. Dara reached into her purse and pulled out a card. I am telling you this because I am tired. Violet, I am tired of the secrets. And honestly, I never liked Celeste. She treats people like furniture. She handed me the card. It had a phone number on it. If you need someone to testify, call me. But only if you are going to burn it all down. I am not going to stick my neck out for a slap on the wrist. She got into her Volvo and drove away, leaving me standing in the exhaust fumes. I drove back to my office, my mind reeling. She neutralized her. What did that mean? When I walked into the marketing firm where I worked, the atmosphere was icy. The receptionist didn't smile. My assistant, Sarah, wouldn't meet my eyes. I went to my desk. My computer was locked. Violet. I turned. It was David, my manager. He looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from foot to foot. "We need to meet in HR," he said. "Now." I followed him to the glass-walled conference room. The HR director, a woman named Linda who usually asked me about my weekend, was sitting there with a thick file in front of her. "Sit down." "Violet," Linda said. I sat. "What is going on?" "We received a complaint," Linda said. "An anonymous tip. It alleges that you have been falsifying expense reports for the last 3 quarters. Specifically, charging personal dinners and travel as client development." I stared at her. "That is ridiculous. I have receipts for everything. You sign off on them." David looked at the table. "We have to investigate." "Vi." The complaint was very detailed. It listed dates and amounts. I felt a cold realization wash over me. The dates, the amounts. Who would have access to that level of detail about my life, Celeste? She had my old bank statements. She knew my schedule. She had probably hired someone to cross-reference my social media with my work trips. "This is retaliation," I said, my voice rising. "My mother is trying to discredit me because of a personal legal dispute. We have to take every allegation seriously," Linda said, her voice robotic, "until the investigation is complete. We are placing you on administrative leave, paid, of course, but you need to hand over your badge and laptop." I looked at David. "You know me. David, you know I wouldn't do this." David looked pained. "I am sorry." "Vi, it came from a board member's contact." My hands are tied. A board member's contact. The network again. The benevolent circle. It wasn't just a group of housewives. It was a web of influence that stretched across the entire county. I handed over my badge. I walked out of the building carrying a cardboard box with my personal mugs and a potted succulent. I felt stripped, naked. My phone buzzed as I got to my car. It was Elias Vance. "Violet," he said, his voice urgent. "I just got a letter from a lawyer representing the party of interest." "What does it say?" I asked, putting the box in the passenger seat. "It is a letter of concern," Elias said. "They are claiming that you are mentally unstable. They cite recent erratic behavior at a family gathering and paranoia regarding established family history. They are suggesting that unsealing the records would cause you psychological harm and that the court should keep them closed for your own protection." I gripped the phone. Erratic behavior. Paranoia. Those are Celeste's words. I said, "She is writing the script. She is trying to paint you as hysterical." Elias confirmed. "If she can convince the judge that you are having a breakdown, he might rule that you aren't competent to handle the information in the file. It is a classic gaslighting tactic. She just got me suspended from work." "Elias," I said, "she is coming at me from every side. Then we have to hit back harder." Elias said, "We need evidence. Hard evidence. Not just stories." I hung up. I sat in my car and screamed. A long, guttural sound that scraped my throat raw. When I got home, Ethan was waiting for me. He saw the box. "They suspended you," he asked, his face falling. "Administrative leave," I said, dropping the box on the floor. "Accused of stealing. It is Celeste. It is all Celeste." Ethan pulled me into a hug. I held on to him. Shaking, I contacted a private investigator. He said into my hair, "A guy named Russo. He is good." "No," I said, pulling back. "No PI. Why, Vi? We are out of our depth. Because if I hire a PI, she wins," I said fiercely. "She wants this to be a transaction." She wants it to be lawyers and investigators and hired guns. I want it to be human. I want to look her in the eye and make her say it. I want to find the truth myself. Ethan looked at me, frustrated but resigned. Okay, then let me help you organize. You have papers everywhere. Let's build a timeline. Let's find the gaps. We spent the evening on the living room floor, surrounded by the scraps of my life, the photocopy from the dinner, the check, the notes from Arthur, the name Lila Hart. We sorted them by year. 1989. The adoption. The donation to North Pine. 1995. The newsletter mention. 2005. North Pine dissolved. There is a gap here, Ethan said, pointing to the early 90s. The nonprofit was active, but there is almost no digital footprint. I looked at the metal box from my closet, the one I had broken open with a hammer. I missed something. I said, I pulled the box over. I dumped everything out again. The vaccination records, the baptism certificate. I ran my hand along the bottom of the box. It felt uneven. I grabbed the screwdriver I had left on the coffee table. I wedged it under the metal bottom of the box and pried. It popped up, a false bottom. Ethan gasped. Hidden underneath was a thin manila folder. No label. I opened it. Inside was a single photograph. It was a 4x6 glossy print, the colors slightly faded with age. It showed two women standing in front of a brick building that looked like the shipping store I had visited. But newer. One woman was Celeste. She looked younger, sharper. She was wearing a red power suit and smiling that tight, controlled smile I knew so well. The other woman was shorter, with dark, curly hair. She was wearing a floral dress, but I couldn't see her face. Someone had taken a black permanent marker and scribbled over her face. Violent, heavy loops of ink that obliterated her features. I flipped the photo over. On the back, in Celeste's handwriting, spiky and aggressive, were words that made my blood run cold. Lila, don't let her talk. I stared at the words. Don't let her talk. It wasn't a reminder to keep a secret. It sounded like an order, or a threat. I looked at Ethan. His face was pale. She knew her. I whispered. She knew her well enough to take a picture with her, and she hated her enough to erase her face. This isn't just about tax fraud. Vi, Ethan said softly, you don't hide a photo like this because of taxes. I looked at the blurred face of the woman named Lila, the woman who had asked for my forgiveness. Celeste wasn't afraid of the truth. She wasn't afraid of the IRS. She wasn't afraid of the scandal. She was afraid of Lila. And for the first time, I realized that my mother's cruelty wasn't just a defense mechanism, it was a containment strategy. She had been holding a door shut for 33 years, not to keep me in, but to keep something else out. I touched the black ink on the photo. I'm going to find her, I said, and if Lila Hart was the monster my mother feared, then I was going to invite her in. The court date was set for the 14th of November. It was a Tuesday, a day that felt irritatingly ordinary for something that would determine whether I was allowed to know my own history. Elias Vance sat across from me in his office, his desk a fortress of paper. He looked grimmer than usual. They are not just filing a motion to intervene. Violet, he said, tapping a thick stack of documents. They are filing a motion to dismiss with prejudice. They are arguing that you have no standing because the original contract, the adoption decree, guaranteed permanent anonymity for all parties. They are citing a precedent from 1975 involving a closed agency that burned its records. Who are they, I asked? Is it still the accountants, technically? Yes, he said. Miller and Associates. But looking at the caliber of these filings, this isn't just a local firm protecting a client list. This is high-level litigation. They have brought in outside counsel from Philadelphia. He took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. They are trying to bury us in paper. Violet, they want to make this so expensive and so exhausting that you just give up. That is the strategy. Attrition. I am not giving up, I said, though I felt a flicker of exhaustion already. Good, Elias said, because if they are fighting this hard to keep a 30-year-old file closed, it is not because they care about the privacy of a birth mother. It is because there is something in that file that incriminates someone who is still alive and wealthy. I left his office with a headache that throbbed behind my eyes. I needed more than legal arguments. I needed names. I called Dara Quinn. We met in the back corner of a bookstore cafe in Greybridge. She was wearing sunglasses indoors, nervously tearing the wrapper off a biscotti. "You shouldn't have called me," she said as I sat down. "Celeste has been making calls. She knows someone is talking. I need to know about Lila Hart." I said, cutting straight to the chase. "You told me she was the fixer, but why did she vanish? What was the scandal?" Dara looked around the quiet cafe. She leaned in, lowering her voice to a whisper. "It wasn't a public scandal," she said. "It was a quiet one. That was the point. Lila wasn't just running North Pine Family Outreach. She was running a side business." "What kind of side business?" Dara took a breath. Lila realized that the families coming to her were desperate and wealthy. She started creating complications. She would tell a family that the birth mother had changed her mind and needed more money for medical expenses, or that there were legal fees that had suddenly tripled. She was squeezing people, and they paid. Of course they paid, Dara said. They were terrified of losing the babies, but then she pushed too hard. She tried it with a family that had connections to the state prosecutor's office. I felt a chill. What happened? The circle closed ranks. Dara said, "The board of North Pine Grant, the pastor. The others, they panicked. They realized Lila was a liability. If she got investigated, the whole tax scheme would unravel. So they made a deal. What kind of deal? I don't know the details," Dara admitted. But overnight, Lila was gone. The nonprofit was dissolved. The records were transferred to private storage or sealed by friendly judges, and everyone went back to their lives. "And Lila?" I asked. "Is she dead?" Dara shook her head. "I don't think so. Celeste used to talk about her, in the present tense. Like a sleeping dog, she was afraid to wake. She grabbed her purse. That is all I know. Violet, truly, if you find her. Don't tell her I sent you. She holds grudges." Dara left, leaving me with the image of a woman who had turned human lives into a bidding war. My next stop was a nursing home on the outskirts of Crestbrook. I had spent 2 nights searching for the names of social workers active in the county in 1990. Most were dead or moved away, but one name, Janine Kovic, had popped up in a church bulletin as a resident of the Shady Elms retirement community. Janine was sitting on the porch, wrapped in a purple shawl, watching the cars drive by. She was 80, maybe older, with eyes that were cloudy but sharp. I introduced myself as a researcher looking into the history of child welfare in the county. It was a half-truth that felt easier than the whole one. 1990, Janine said, her voice raspy. That was a busy year. The system was overflowing. Crack epidemic, recession. We were drowning in cases. I asked her about private placements, about North Pine Family Outreach. Her expression changed. The nostalgia vanished, replaced by a guarded wariness. North Pine. She repeated, "We didn't work with them. They were separate. Separate." How I asked gently. "They had their own channels," she said, looking away. "We were told not to interfere. If a case came in and the mother said she was working with North Pine, we had to back off. The paperwork was always handled by private attorneys. Did that seem unusual to you?" Janine laughed, a dry, bitter sound. "Honey, everything about that place was unusual. The speed of it. You would have a baby born on a Tuesday and finalized by Friday. That doesn't happen in the state system. You need home studies, background checks, waiting periods. But with North Pine, there was pressure. Pressure from whom? Community benefactors," she said. "Big names, people who sat on hospital boards. They would call the supervisors and say, 'Let's expedite this one. Good family. Don't hold it up with red tape.'" I took a piece of paper out of my pocket. I wrote down CW 89402. "Does this look like a case number from that time?" I asked. She squinted at it. Then she nodded slowly. "That is a judicial bypass number," she said. "We used those when a judge signed off directly, bypassing the agency review. You only saw those when someone high up wanted the file closed fast and tight." She looked at me, her eyes softening. "Is that you?" she asked. "Are you the number?" "Yes," I said. She reached out and patted my hand. Her skin was paper thin. "Be careful, honey," she whispered. The people who used those numbers didn't like to be asked questions. They thought money fixed everything, even sin. I drove home feeling like I was carrying a stone in my chest. Money fixed everything, even sin. When I walked into my house, my phone was ringing. It was Celeste, Violet. She said. Her voice was unrecognizable. It wasn't the sharp, imperious tone she usually used. It was soft, almost fragile. "Mom," I said, wary. "I want to see you," she said. "Your birthday. It was a disaster. I ruined it. I know I did. I want a do-over. Just a quiet dinner. You, me, and Grant. At the house. Please, Violet. I miss you." I hesitated. Every instinct I had screamed that this was a trap. But there was a small, stupid part of me, the part that was 5 years old and wanted her approval, that wanted to believe her. "Okay," I said. Tonight, 7 o'clock, I will make your favorite, chicken piccata." I dressed carefully for the dinner. Armor. I wore a stiff button-down shirt and trousers. I told Ethan where I was going. "If I am not back by 10, come get me," I said. He kissed my forehead. "Be careful. She is cornered." The house was warm when I arrived. It smelled of lemon and capers. Grant was in the living room, pouring drinks. He looked aged, his shoulders slumped, but he gave me a weak smile. "Hey, kiddo," he said. Celeste came out of the kitchen. She hugged me, holding on a little too long. She felt thin. "Tense. I'm so glad you came," she said. The dinner was surreal. We talked about the weather. We talked about the neighbors. We talked about everything except the gaping hole in the center of the table. It wasn't until Grant cleared the plates and poured coffee that Celeste made her move. She clasped her hands on the table and looked at me. "Violet," she began, "I have been doing a lot of thinking. About your future." I put my coffee cup down. "Here it comes. I know things have been strained," she said, "and I know you are worried about your career. With the investigation at work, it is so unfair what is happening to you." She paused, waiting for me to agree. I said nothing. "Grant and I want to help," she continued. "We were looking at that new condominium complex by the river. The Riverwalk. It is beautiful. Secure. It is expensive." I said. "It is," she agreed. "But we want to put the down payment on a unit for you. A significant down payment, 40%. It would give you stability, a fresh start." I looked at her. Her eyes were wide, pleading. "And what do I have to do?" I asked. She blinked. "You don't have to do anything. It is a gift. There is always a condition." "Mom," I said. She sighed, looking at Grant, then back at me. "We just think," she said carefully, "that this legal petition is causing everyone a lot of stress. It is expensive. It is hurting your reputation. It is hurting ours. If you were to let it go, we could focus on building your future instead of digging up the past." I felt a cold clarity settle over me. "You are trying to buy me off," I said, again. "Violet, please," she said, her voice rising. "It is not buying you off. It is protecting you. You don't know what you are doing. You are poking at things that are dangerous. Dangerous for whom I asked. For you or for me. For everyone," she snapped, the mask slipping. "You think you want the truth, but you don't. You don't understand what I protected you from. What I demanded. What did you protect me from?" She stood up, her hands slamming onto the table. "I protected you from being nothing," she shouted. "From being a statistic, I gave you a name. I gave you a life. And you are throwing it in my face because you found some old paperwork I stood up to. I am not a bad investment you can just write off. Celeste, I am a person, and I don't want your condo. I don't want your money. I want to know who Lila Hart is." Celeste went pale. The color drained from her face so fast I thought she might faint. "Get out," she whispered. I grabbed my purse. "I am going. But I am not dropping the petition." I walked out into the cool night air. I was shaking, but I wasn't broken. The next morning, the fallout began. I woke up to a fraud alert on my phone. My bank was flagging suspicious activity. I called the number immediately. Ms. Reed, the representative said, "We declined a request to open a home equity line of credit in your name at 3 a.m. The applicant had your social security number, your mother's maiden name, and your birth date." "Who was it?" I asked. "It was an online application," she said, "but the IP address traces back to a location in Graybridge." Graybridge? The accountants? Or someone they hired? They were trying to ruin my credit. If I had financial problems, I couldn't pay my lawyer. I would look unstable to the court. It was a systematic dismantling of my life. I hung up and went downstairs. Ethan was sitting at the kitchen table, his laptop open. He looked up, his eyes wide. "Vi, look at this," he said. I looked at the screen. He had been digging into the archives of the Graybridge Gazette. It was a scanned article from 1994. The headline read, "Local Charity Audit Reveals Missing Funds." The text was grainy, but legible. State investigators are looking into discrepancies at a local family services nonprofit, following allegations of missing donation receipts. The organization, whose name has been withheld pending the investigation, reportedly failed to account for over $500,000 in operational grants received between 1989 and 1991. Ethan pointed to the date. 1989 to 91, he said. "That is the exact window of your adoption. And look at the next paragraph." I read on. "The investigation was closed after the organization agreed to dissolve voluntarily and transfer its remaining assets to a private trust. No charges were filed. They bought their way out," I whispered. "They stole $500,000 probably in illegal adoption fees, and when the state got close, they just paid a settlement and disappeared, and the name was withheld." Ethan said, "But we know what it was, North Pine." I felt a sudden, sharp anger, not at Celeste, but at Grant, who sat at that table last night and poured coffee while his wife tried to bribe me. Grant, who was a board member. Grant, who had signed the checks. He wasn't innocent. He was the silent partner. I grabbed my keys. "Where are you going?" Ethan asked. "To see Grant," I said, without Celeste. I knew Celeste had a standing appointment at the hair salon on Thursday mornings. She would be gone for 2 hours. I pulled into the driveway and saw Grant in the open garage. He was polishing his golf clubs, a mindless, rhythmic motion. He looked up when I walked in. He looked tired, defeated. "Violet," he said, "you shouldn't be here. She will be back soon. I am not here for her." "Grant," I said, "I am here for you." I walked up to him. I showed him the screenshot of the article on my phone. $500,000. "Grant," I said, "missing funds. 1991. You were on the board." He stared at the phone. He didn't deny it. He just sighed. A long, deflating sound. I didn't know the specifics. "Vi," he said quietly, "I really didn't. You signed the checks." I said, "I found the ledger entries. You knew money was moving." He put the polishing cloth down. "It was tax stuff," he said, his voice pleading. "That is what they told me. Miller said it was a strategy. We put money in. We got deductions out. I didn't ask questions. That was the rule. You don't ask questions about the sausage making. We aren't talking about sausage." "Grant," I yelled. "We are talking about me. I was the product." He flinched. He looked at me, his eyes filling with tears. "I know," he whispered. "I know, and I have hated myself for it for 30 years. "Then help me." I said, "Stop protecting her. Stop protecting the firm. Give me something I can use." He looked at the door leading into the house. He looked terrified. But then he looked back at me, and I saw something shift. He was tired of the wait, too. He walked over to a workbench in the back of the garage. He moved a stack of paint cans aside to reveal a small wall safe installed between the studs. He punched in a code. The door clicked open. He reached in and pulled out a thick, leather-bound book and a single, stamped document. He handed them to me. "These were in the attic," he said. Celeste told me to burn them years ago. I told her I did, but I couldn't. I don't know why. Maybe I knew this day would come. I opened the leather book. It was a ledger. Handwritten. January 1990. Received from Sterling Trust, $50,000. Payout Heart Services, $40,000. Payout Medical, $5,000. Balance retained. I looked at the stamped document. It was an invoice. Billing Entity Heart Services, LLC, Service Placement Support /Infant F, amount $45,000. Heart Services, Lila Hart. Here was the connection, direct, undeniable. The money went from my parents to the nonprofit, and the nonprofit funneled it to Lila Hart's private company. It wasn't charity, it was laundering. And there it was. Infant F. I was Infant F. Thank you. Grant, I said, clutching the documents to my chest. He looked at me, his face gray. She never wanted to hurt you, Violet, he said softly. She just wanted to own you. She thought if she paid enough, you would be hers forever. She didn't understand that you can't buy loyalty. She didn't buy loyalty. Grant, I said, turning to leave. She bought silence, and the lease just ran out. I drove away from the house with the evidence in the passenger seat. I parked in a lay-by a mile down the road and just breathed. My identity, my entire life story, had been a financial instrument. I was a tax deduction for them and a payday for Lila Hart. Celeste's cruelty, her control, her paranoia. It wasn't just bad parenting, it was strategy. She had to control me because I was the evidence of a crime. I looked at the invoice again. Hart Services, LLC. If Lila Hart had a company, she had a paper trail. And if she had a paper trail, I could find her. The sun was shining, but I felt cold. I finally had the truth. But as I looked at the words, Infant F, I realized that the truth didn't set you free. It just armed you for the war. And the war was far from over. Because now I had the weapon that could destroy them all. The house had become a bunker. Since the suspension from my job, the silence in the hallways felt heavy, pressurized, like the air inside a submarine diving past its safety limit. I spent my days organizing evidence on the dining room table, turning our place of meals into a command center for a war I hadn't started, but was determined to finish. My attorney, Elias Vance, was the only person besides Ethan who seemed to understand the gravity of the siege. We met in his office on a rainy Tuesday, the gray light filtering through the blinds and washing out the color in his face. He slid a document across the desk toward me. "This is the affidavit from the opposition," he said. "They are filing for a mental health evaluation for you. They are claiming that your pursuit of these records is a symptom of, and I quote, obsessive fixation and emotional instability exacerbated by workplace stress." I laughed, but it was a dry, hollow sound. Workplace stress that they manufactured. I said, "Exactly," Elias said, pointing a pen at me. "But we have to prove that the judge doesn't know the history. He sees a woman suspended for fraud who is now suing her mother. It looks messy. Violet, and judges hate messy. So what do?" I asked. "We change the narrative," he said. "We request an independent review of the adoption file. We ask the court to appoint a special master, a neutral third party, to look at the sealed documents in camera. If a judge sees the irregularities themselves, rather than taking our word for it, the crazy daughter argument falls apart. But to get that," he added, leaning forward, "we need to show a pattern of interference. We need to prove that the opposition is reacting to your petition, not your mental state. We need to connect the credit fraud, the HR complaint, and the intimidation. We need to show that you are not paranoid, but persecuted." I nodded. "I have the ledger from Grant." I said, "The payment to Heart Services." "That is good," Elias said. "But it is singular. It proves one transaction. To blow this open, to force the court's hand. We need to prove a system. We need to show that North Pine Family Outreach was a criminal enterprise masquerading as a charity." I left his office feeling a strange mixture of dread and determination. I needed more than just my own price tag. I needed the catalog. As I walked to my car, my phone buzzed. It was a number I didn't recognize. "Hello, Violet." The voice was jagged, breathless. "It is Dara Quinn. Dara," I said, stopping on the sidewalk. "I thought you said not to call you." "I can't sleep," she said, and I could hear the lighter clicking in the background. "I haven't slept since I saw you. I keep thinking about Celeste, about the way she looked on that stage." "What about her?" "She is getting away with it," Dara whispered. "She has always gotten away with it. And I helped her. I waited." The rain drummed against the roof of a parked car next to me. "Meet me," she said. "The old mill park. By the river. 20 minutes." I found her sitting on a wet bench, huddled inside a trench coat. She looked older than she had at the luncheon. Her face was drawn, her eyes rimmed with red. She didn't look like a member of the country club set anymore. She looked like a woman whose ghosts had finally caught up with her. She didn't say hello. She just reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, silver flash drive. "Take it," she said, thrusting it at me. "What is this?" I asked, closing my fingers around the cold metal. 10 years ago," she said, staring at the rushing water of the river. "There was an audit scare. Not the state investigation that was earlier. This was internal. The IRS was asking questions about some of the foundation's carryover credits. Celeste panicked. She called me. She asked me to come over and help her sanitize the home office." "Sanitize?" I repeated. "We shredded 4 garbage bags full of paper." Dara said, "Board minutes, donor logs, correspondence with Lila Hart. We spent all night feeding that machine. Celeste was drinking wine and laughing, saying how we were tidying up history. But you didn't shred everything," I guessed. Dara shook her head. "I don't know why. Maybe I was scared she would turn on me one day. Maybe I just wanted insurance. But I scanned a batch of the documents before we destroyed them. I put them on a hard drive and forgot about them. Until you showed up." She looked at me then, her eyes pleading. "It is all there, Violet. The board minutes where they discuss the placement fees, the lists of donors who never gave a dime to charity but ended up with healthy infants. It shows the structure." "Thank you, Dara," I said softly. "Don't thank me," she said. Standing up, "I am not doing this for you. I am doing it because I am tired of carrying it." She walked away into the drizzle, leaving me with the system in the palm of my hand. When I got home, I plugged the drive into my laptop. The files were dated 2004, but the scans went back to 1988. I opened a file labeled Board Minutes, June 1990. Item 4, Review of Placement Support Donations. Discussion regarding the reallocation of funds from the general operating account to Hart Services, LLC, for consulting fees. Motion to approve. C. Sterling. Second G. Sterling. I opened another file. Donor Acknowledgements, 1991. It was a list. Names, dates, and amounts. The Miller family, $40,000. The Henderson family, $45,000. The Vance family, $50,000. I froze. Vance. I scanned the list again. No, not Elias Vance, Robert Vance, a different family. But the names stuck out. These were prominent names. People who had wings of hospitals named after them, people who sat on the school board. They were listed as platinum donors, but next to each name, handwritten in the margin, was a code. Infant M, Infant B, Infant F, my code. This wasn't just tax fraud. This was a private marketplace, a baby brokerage for the elite of Pennsylvania, run through a shell charity to make the purchase tax-deductible. It was brilliant. It was evil. And it implicated half the town. I sat back, the glow of the screen illuminating the dark room. This was the good cause Elias needed. This proved that the privacy interest wasn't about protecting birth mothers. It was about protecting the buyers. My phone rang, shattering the silence. It was my cousin. "Leo, Vi," he said. He sounded breathless, anxious. "Hey, Leo, what is wrong? I just left the house," he said. "Celeste's house. Vi, it is crazy over there. She is manic. Manic how? She is obsessed with this gala on Saturday, the Graybridge Community Gala. She is receiving the Civic Light Award. It is the biggest award in the county. I know. I said, I saw the announcement. Yeah. Well, she is on a warpath about the guest list. Leo said, she cornered me in the kitchen. She told me to call you. To call me, I asked, after she tried to buy me off with a condo. She wants you there. Vi, Leo said. She was very specific. She said, tell Violet that if she wants this family to survive, she will be at that table. Tell her we need a picture, a united front. I felt a surge of nausea. She wanted a prop. She wanted to stand on stage, accept an award for her virtue, and point to her loving, grateful daughter as proof of her sainthood. It was a power play. If I showed up, I was validating her lie. I was telling the world and the court that everything was fine, that I was the unstable one who had come to her senses. She said if you don't come, Leo added, his voice dropping, she will reevaluate her estate planning regarding the rest of us. She is holding the inheritance over everyone's head. Vi, she is terrifying. Tell her I got the message. Leo. I said. I hung up. I walked to the window. I looked out at the street. I thought about the files on the flash drive. I thought about the invoice in the safe. I thought about the woman with the scratched-out face. Celeste wanted a picture. She wanted a scene. Maybe I should give her one. Ethan came home an hour later. He found me sitting on the couch, dressed in my bathrobe, staring at the wall. I am going to the gala, I said. He stopped in the doorway, dropping his keys on the small table. What he said, Violet, no, that is suicide. It is necessary. I said, she wants me there to legitimize her. If I don't go, she spins the story that I am estranged and unstable. If I go, if you go. You are walking into the lion's den, Ethan said, his voice rising. You are suspended from work. Vi, you are under investigation. If you cause a scene at a high-profile event, the opposition will use it to bury you. They will say, look, she is unhinged. She attacked her mother at an award ceremony. I am not going to attack her. I said calmly, I am going to ask a question. A question, Ethan laughed, frustrated. You think a question is going to stop a woman like Celeste? She will crush you. Violet, she has money. She has lawyers. She has the whole town on her payroll. You are one person. I am not one person. I stood up, my voice trembling with sudden intensity. I am the foundation. Ethan. Don't you see? None of this works without me. Her image, her tax credits, her Mother of the Year status, it is all built on the lie of my adoption. If I walk away, I am just a victim. But if I stand there and refuse to be the prop, I take the power back. Ethan looked at me. He looked scared. I don't want you to be a martyr. Vi, he said softly. I just want you to be okay. I want us to be okay. We can't be okay as long as I am a receipt. I said. He didn't argue after that, but the space between us felt wider than ever. He was trying to protect the life we had built. I was trying to excavate the ground it stood on. The next morning, a courier arrived at the door. He was a young man in a generic uniform. Chewing gum? Violet Reed, he asked. Yes, sign here. He handed me a thick, stiff envelope. The return address was a P.O. box in Philadelphia. I opened it in the kitchen. It was a legal notice, a cease and desist order. R.E. Harassment of former officers and interference with business operations. Dear Ms. Reed, we represent Heart Services, LLC. It has come to our attention that you have been making persistent inquiries regarding the private business dealings of our client, causing distress and potential reputational damage. You are hereby ordered to cease all contact with past affiliates of North Pine Family Outreach and to desist from making defamatory statements regarding the financial history of Heart Services, LLC. Failure to comply will result in immediate litigation for damages. I stared at the letterhead. Heart Services, LLC. I went to my laptop. I pulled up the Pennsylvania Department of State Business Entity Search. I typed in the name. There it was. Heart Services, LLC, status active. Reinstatement date, October 24th, 2023. October 24th. Last week. 3 days after I filed my petition, I felt a cold shiver that had nothing to do with the temperature. The company had been dormant for decades. But the moment I started knocking on the door, someone woke it up. Someone filed the paperwork, paid the fees, and reactivated the entity just to send me this letter. Lila Hart wasn't a ghost. She was watching, or someone acting for her was. This wasn't a warning. It was proof. You don't reactivate a shell company to sue a nobody unless that nobody is standing on a landmine. I called Elias. We have them. I said, my voice steady. What do you mean, they sent me a cease and desist? I said, from Heart Services. They reactivated the company last week. Elias was silent for a moment. Then he let out a low whistle. That is a tactical error, he said. If they reactivated the company, they reestablished jurisdiction. And if they are threatening to sue you for defamation regarding their business dealings, they have opened the door for us to inquire what those business dealings were during discovery. They just handed us a subpoena target. But Elias, I said, I am going to the gala. Violet, he warned, I am going. Elias, Celeste invited me. I have a ticket. I am going to be the dutiful daughter. And what are you going to do? I am going to ask about the business dealings. I said, Violet, listen to me, Elias said, his lawyer voice sharp. If you go there and scream accusations, you lose. You look vindictive. You look crazy. The judge will see a woman trying to humiliate her mother. I know. I said, so if you do this, you have to be surgical. No emotions, no tears, no screaming. You present facts, verifiable facts. You ask questions that have only one answer. You don't make a scene. You make a record. I understand. I said. I hung up. I looked at the cease and desist letter. I looked at the flash drive. I looked at the invoice from Grant's safe. I had the gun. I had the bullets. Now I just needed the stage. Saturday arrived with a sky the color of bruised iron. The Graybridge Community Gala was being held at the Hotel DuPont, a venue that dripped with crystal chandeliers and old money. I spent the afternoon preparing. I didn't dress like a victim. I didn't dress like a corporate manager. I wore a dress I had bought years ago and never worn a deep, midnight blue silk that was simple, severe, and elegant. I pulled my hair back into a tight bun, minimal makeup. I looked in the mirror. I looked like her. The realization didn't sting this time. It felt like camouflage. Ethan stood in the doorway of the bedroom, wearing his tuxedo. He looked handsome, but his face was grim. Are we really doing this? He asked. I picked up a slim leather folder. Inside were 3 pieces of paper, the invoice from Grant, the check Celeste had tried to give me, and the copy of the cease and desist. We are, I said. We drove to Graybridge in silence. The valet parking line was a parade of Mercedes and Range Rovers. I saw the mayor. I saw the hospital's CEO. I saw the people who ran this county. We walked into the ballroom. It was a sea of black ties and sequins. A string quartet was playing something polite and Vivaldi-esque. Violet? I turned. It was Celeste. She was holding court near the ice sculpture. She was wearing a gold gown that shimmered under the lights. She looked magnificent, triumphant. She glided over to us, her face arranging itself into a mask of maternal affection. She reached out and squeezed my hands. Her grip was iron. You came, she whispered, leaning in to kiss my cheek. Her breath smelled of champagne. Good girl. I knew you would make the right choice. She pulled back, beaming at the people watching us. Everyone. Look who made it, my daughter. Violet. People smiled and nodded. What a lovely family. So supportive. Celeste leaned close to my ear again. Her voice dropped to a razor wire. Smile, she hissed. The photographer is coming around in 10 minutes. If you ruin this, Violet, I will make sure you never work in this state again. I smiled. It was the coldest smile I had ever produced. I wouldn't miss it. Mother, I said. She patted my cheek, satisfied that her threat had landed, and turned back to her admirers. We took our seats at the head table. I sat between Ethan and a man I didn't know. a board member of the hospital. The dinner was an endurance test. I ate nothing. I drank water. I watched Celeste charm the table. I watched Grant stare into his wine glass, looking like a man awaiting execution. Then the speeches began. The mayor spoke. The head of the Civic League spoke. They used words like integrity, compassion, selflessness. And then, Celeste was called to the stage. The room erupted in applause. She walked up the steps, the gold dress catching the light. She took the Crystal Award. She stood at the microphone, looking out at the crowd with tears in her eyes. "Thank you," she said, her voice trembling perfectly. "This award belongs to all of us, to the families who believe in the power of community." She looked down at our table. "I started my journey in philanthropy 33 years ago," she said, "when we adopted our daughter, Violet. That experience taught me that family isn't just about blood, it is about sacrifice. It is about doing whatever it takes to protect the ones you love." The room sighed with collective sentiment. "Violet," she said, gesturing to me. "Stand up. Darling." The spotlight swung to me. The beam was blinding. I stood up. The applause washed over me. Celeste was smiling, gesturing for me to sit back down, to accept the homage and disappear. But I didn't sit. I walked toward the stage. The applause faltered. A ripple of confusion went through the room. This wasn't in the script. Celeste's smile froze. She took a half step back from the podium. "Violet," she said, her voice amplified by the microphone. "What are you doing?" I walked up the stairs. I stood next to her. I didn't grab the microphone from her hand. I simply leaned into it. The acoustics were perfect. I just wanted to add something. "Mother," I said. My voice was calm, terrifyingly calm. The room went silent. You could hear the hum of the HVAC system. "You spoke about sacrifice," I said, "and about the nonprofit that started it all, North Pine Family Outreach." Celeste's hand gripped the podium. Her knuckles were white. "Violet, this isn't the time," she hissed. Moving to block me, I stepped around her. I opened the slim leather folder I was carrying. "I just have one question," I said to the room. It was a simple question, directed at the board members, the bankers, the pillars of the community sitting in the dark. If North Pine Family Outreach was a charity, why did I find an invoice for $45,000 labeled Infant F in our basement? A gasp went through the room. It was sharp, audible. I held up the document. It was small in the big room, but the projection screens on either side of the stage, meant to show Celeste's face, caught the paper in my hand. "And why?" I continued, my voice steady. "Did the funds go to a private company called Heart Services, LLC?" Celeste lunged for the microphone. "Cut it!" she screamed. "Cut the mic." But the sound guy was too slow, or too shocked. "And why?" I asked, raising the second document, the cease and desist letter. "Did Heart Services, LLC, reactivate last week? Just to threaten me into silence?" The room was in chaos now. People were standing up. Voices were rising. Security guards were moving toward the stage. Celeste grabbed my arm. Her nails dug into my flesh. "You ungrateful little bitch," she whispered. Her face contorted into a mask of pure hate. "I saved you." I looked at her. I looked at the woman who had curated every moment of my life, who had turned my history into a tax shelter and my identity into a prop. "No," I said into the dead air, as the microphone finally cut out. "You bought me." The security guards reached us. They were gentle but firm, guiding me away from the podium. I didn't fight them. I didn't need to. As I was led down the stairs, I saw the flash of cameras, not the official event photographer, but the phones, dozens of them, raised like lighter flames in the dark. I saw the journalist from the local paper, the one Ethan had spotted earlier, frantically typing on his phone. I saw Grant, still sitting at the table, his head in his hands, and I saw the faces of the crowd. They weren't looking at Celeste with adoration anymore. They were looking at her with confusion, with suspicion. I walked out of the ballroom, Ethan right behind me. We burst into the lobby. the cool air hitting my flushed face. Violet, it was Celeste. She had broken away from her handlers. She was running after us, her gold dress trailing on the carpet. She caught up to us near the valet stand. She was panting, her perfect hair disheveled. "You ruined it," she sobbed. "You ruined everything. Do you have any idea what you have done?" I stopped. I turned to face her one last time. I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It wasn't anger. It wasn't fear. It was air. For the first time in 33 years. I could breathe. I didn't ruin it. "Celeste," I said softly. I just turned on the lights. She stared at me, her mouth opening and closing, grasping for a weapon she no longer had. She had built her castle on a foundation of lies. She had assumed the foundation would always be silent, always be sturdy, always be hers. She forgot that foundations can move, and when they move, the house falls down. I turned to the valet. "My car. Please." I didn't look back. I knew what was coming next. The lawsuits, the investigations, the fallout. But as I stepped into the night, I realized something. I wasn't the daughter who was adopted for tax benefits anymore. I wasn't the victim. I was the witness, and I had just taken the stand. The Graybridge Community Gala was held in the grand ballroom of the Hotel DuPont, a space that smelled of old money, white lilies, and the kind of floor wax that cost more than my car payment. I walked in through the double mahogany doors, my hand resting lightly on Ethan's arm. I had chosen my dress carefully. It was not the pastel confection Celeste would have picked out for me, nor was it the severe business suit of a woman under investigation. It was a simple sheath of midnight blue silk, unadorned, with a high neck and long sleeves. It was a blank canvas. I wasn't there to be decorative. I was there to be a delivery system. In my right hand, I carried a slim leather folder. It contained only 2 pieces of paper, but it felt heavier than lead. The room was a sea of tuxedos and shimmering gowns. I saw the faces of the people who ran our corner of Pennsylvania judges, hospital administrators, developers, and scattered among them, I saw the faces from the donor list on Dara's flash drive, the platinum donors, the benevolent circle, Violet. The voice cut through the hum of polite conversation like a silver bell. Celeste detached herself from a group of admirers near the ice sculpture and glided toward us. She was wearing gold. Of course she was. She looked like a trophy that had learned to walk. She reached us and immediately framed my face with her hands, a gesture that looked affectionate to the room but felt like a vice to me. "I am so proud of you," she cooed, loud enough for the mayor's wife to hear. "I knew you would come. I knew you would support the family." She leaned in to kiss my cheek, and the performative warmth vanished instantly. "You look pale," she whispered, her lips barely moving against my skin. "And that dress is dour. But at least you are here. Just remember to smile when the camera comes around. You need to choose your future carefully. Violet. Tonight is an audition for your inheritance." I pulled back, looking her dead in the eye. "I am not here for the inheritance. Celeste," I said softly. She ignored me, linking her arm through mine and turning me toward the photographer. "Smile, darling," she commanded. The flash blinded me for a second. In that afterimage of white light, I saw the truth of it. I wasn't a daughter to her. I was a prop. I was the visible proof of her charity. The living receipt for the transaction she had finalized 33 years ago. We were seated at the head table. I sat in silence, sipping water. While the dinner service moved around us like a synchronized ballet, Grant sat 2 seats away, staring into his wine glass, looking like a man waiting for the guillotine. He knew. He knew what was in the folder. When the speeches began, the lights dimmed, the spotlight hit the stage, illuminating the podium where Celeste stood to accept the Pillar of the Community Award. She was magnificent. I had to give her that. She spoke with a trembling humility that brought tears to the eyes of the woman sitting next to me. "I accept this award not for myself, but for the concept of family," Celeste said, her voice catching perfectly. "When Grant and I founded North Pine Family Outreach all those years ago, We didn't do it for recognition. We did it because we believed that every child deserves a home. We believed in sacrifice. Applause rippled through the room. I scanned the darkness. I saw the board members clapping. I saw the accountant from Miller and Associates nodding vigorously. They were applauding their own immunity. She looked down at me, her face glowing with benevolence. My own daughter, Violet, is the greatest testament to that work, she said. She is the joy of my life. She knows that true love isn't about biology. It is about the choice to protect and nurture. The spotlight swung to me. The room turned, expecting the grateful daughter to wave, perhaps to dab a tear. I stood up. Celeste smiled, gesturing for me to sit, to accept the adulation and fade back into the background. But I didn't sit. I walked toward the stairs. The smile faltered on her face. A murmur of confusion started in the back of the room. This wasn't in the run of show. I walked up the steps, the leather folder tucked under my arm. I stepped into the circle of light. Celeste hissed at me, her eyes wide with panic. "What are you doing?" "Sit down." I walked past her to the microphone stand. The QA portion of the evening was technically scheduled for later. Usually reserved for lighthearted questions about community garden projects, I decided to move it up. I adjusted the microphone. The feedback whined for a split second, silencing the room completely. "I just have a question for the honoree," I said. My voice was steady, resonant. It didn't sound like the voice of the girl who used to shrink in the kitchen. It sounded like a prosecutor. Celeste lunged for the mic, but I sidestepped. "You spoke about North Pine Family Outreach," I continued, speaking clearly to the hundreds of faces in the dark. "You said it was built on sacrifice." I opened the folder. I pulled out the first document. It was the invoice Grant had given me, the one stamped by Lila Hart. "So I am confused," I said. "If North Pine was a charity, why do I have an invoice here from 1990, authorizing a payment of $45,000 for infant F?" The silence in the room changed. It went from confused to brittle. "And why?" I asked. Holding up the second document, the check Celeste had tried to bribe me with, was the money funneled to a private entity called Heart Services. Celeste laughed. It was a high, shrill sound that cracked in the middle. "Violet, you are being emotional," she shouted, grabbing my arm. "She is confused. Everyone. She has been under a lot of stress at work. This is a misunderstanding." She turned to the sound technician in the back. "Cut the mic. Cut it." But the technician was watching me. Everyone was watching me. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I looked out at the board members who were half standing in their seats. "I am not confused," I said into the microphone. "I am asking why a nonprofit that has been defunct for 20 years is currently paying legal fees to block me from seeing my own adoption file. I am asking why there is an active party of interest fighting to keep a 33-year-old ledger sealed." I looked at the accountant's table. "Who are you protecting?" I asked. The room erupted. It wasn't applause this time. It was the low, rumbling frequency of scandal. Chairs scraped against the floor. People were whispering, pointing. A man in a tuxedo, one of the GALA organizers, rushed the stage. "That is enough," he yelled. "Cut the sound." Security guards were moving toward me from the wings. I stepped back from the podium. I didn't resist. I had said what I needed to say. I held the documents up one last time, turning so the light hit them. In the front row, a young man with a press badge, the journalist from the Crestbrook Gazette, raised his camera. He wasn't taking a picture of Celeste. He was zooming in on the paper in my hand. Click, click, click. The shutter sound was the loudest thing in the room. Celeste looked at the photographer, then at me. Her face went gray. The mask didn't just slip. It shattered. She looked old. She looked terrified. I walked down the stairs, the security guard guiding me firmly by the elbow. I didn't look at the floor. I looked straight ahead, walking through the parted sea of the Gray Bridge elite. They stared at me with a mixture of horror and awe. I wasn't the tax deduction anymore. I was the demolition crew. I walked out of the ballroom, through the lobby, and into the cool night air of the valet circle. Violet. The scream was raw, guttural. Celeste came bursting through the revolving doors. stumbling in her heels. She ignored the valet, ignored the people watching from the lobby. She grabbed my shoulders, her fingers digging into my flesh. "You stupid girl," she hissed, shaking me. "You stupid, stupid girl. Do you have any idea what you have done? You have destroyed us." "I didn't destroy anything, Celeste," I said calmly, removing her hands from my arms. "I just asked a question." "You think you know?" she cried, tears streaming down her face, ruining her makeup. "You think you know about Lila? You think she was some victim? She was a monster. Violet. She would have sold you to the highest bidder. She would have used you." I froze. "Used me how I asked." Celeste covered her mouth, realizing she had said too much. She looked around wildly, but there was no one to spin the story to. "It was just us. I saved you," she sobbed, clutching her chest. "I paid her price so she would go away. I did it to keep you safe. Everything I did. The sealed records, the lawyers, the lies. It was all to keep you safe from her." I looked at my mother. For the first time, I believed her. She was terrified. She truly believed that her control was a form of love, that her manipulation was protection. But that was the tragedy of it. She had built a fortress to keep the monster out, but she had locked me in with the lies. "You didn't save me, Mom," I said softly. "You just outbid her." I turned away. Ethan pulled the car up to the curb. "Violet, please," she begged, her voice breaking into a wail. "Don't leave me. They will come for me now. The IRS, the state. They will come." I opened the car door. "Then you better call your accountant," I said. I got in. As we pulled away, I watched her in the rearview mirror. She was standing alone under the harsh lights of the hotel canopy, a figure in gold shrinking into the darkness. Stripped of her audience, stripped of her virtue, and finally, stripped of me. My phone buzzed in my lap. I looked down. It was a text from Elias Vance. "The judge just ruled. The GALA incident is already hitting social media. The party of interest withdrew their motion to dismiss 10 minutes ago. They are cutting their losses." I read the next line. "Limited access granted pending review. I have the file. Violet, I am looking at your original birth certificate right now." I stared at the screen. The wall was down, the seal was broken, and then the final text came through. Birth mother Lila Hart. Birth father unknown. I closed my eyes, letting the air fill my lungs. Lila Hart wasn't just the broker. She wasn't just the woman with the scratched-out face. She was my mother. Celeste had paid her own competition to go away. She had bought the daughter of the woman she feared most. I looked out the window at the passing streetlights of Graybridge. The scandal was just beginning. There would be investigations. There would be headlines. The benevolent circle would be exposed for the trafficking ring it was. Celeste's legacy was ash, but I wasn't afraid. I had burned it all down, just like I promised. And in the ashes, for the first time in 33 years, I could see myself. Thank you so much for listening to this story. It has been a journey through the dark corridors of family secrets, and I hope Violet's fight for the truth resonated with you. It is a reminder that the foundations we stand on are sometimes built on things we cannot see, and that the truth, no matter how painful, is the only thing that can truly set us free. I would love to hear your thoughts on Violet's choice. Did she do the right thing by exposing her mother publicly, or was the cost too high? Please leave a comment below and let me know where you are listening from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe to Revenge Stories for more tales of betrayal, justice, and the complexities of the human heart. Until next time.